You very likely know by now about a young woman from Texas named Kate Cox, 31 years old, whose 20-week-old fetus has trisomy 18, which is a fatal genetic condition that'll likely mean her child won't live more than a few days outside of the womb, if it even makes it that far. She was seeking an exemption in court from the state's abortion ban, and was initially granted that exemption by a district court judge in Travis County, Texas. But Texas's far-right Attorney General, Ken Paxton, who only just recently survived an impeachment effort from his own party, appealed the ruling to the Texas Supreme Court. And tonight, the state Supreme Court reversed the lower court's ruling and refused to allow Kate Cox the exemption. Quote, in its 7-page ruling, the Supreme Court found that Ms. Cox's doctor asked the court to pre-authorize the abortion, yet she could not, or at least did not, attest to the court that Ms. Cox's condition poses the risks the exception requires. Granted, the decision is moot, practically speaking, since Cox already left the state to seek medical care elsewhere. Her whereabouts aren't currently known, nor should they be, because she should be granted freedom to have agency over her own body, which clearly wasn't the case here. And so now, this woman who has been in and out of the emergency room dealing with both a medical emergency and the grief of losing a child that she very much wanted, has the added burden of fleeing her home state because a bunch of theocrats in power have decided to insert themselves in her medical decisions. That's what Republican freedom looks like in the year 2023. And by the way, for those who would suggest that this is someone who simply decided not to have the baby, she was very, very straightforward about the fact that she wanted it, but the pregnancy wasn't viable, something she was clear about and emotional about.
Kate, you didn't have to give an interview today. You don't have to give any interviews, but you did want to speak today. Why?
I wanted the opportunity to tell my story. I know personally before going into this, I never imagined we'd be in this position. I never imagined I would ever want or need an abortion. And I think by sharing this story, you can imagine, the women that you love in your life, and, imagine they're pregnant and so happy and looking forward to the baby, and they find out that she will not survive. She'll either die in my belly, or I'll carry her to term and have to deliver her stillborn, or if she arrives into this world, her life will be measured in minutes or hours or days and plagued with medical devices. She would need to be placed directly onto hospice. So imagine receiving that news and pairing that with the risks and complications of continuing the pregnancy and the childbirth. It's overwhelming. So I wanted to share my story because I never would have thought of it before it happened to me. And so I just, want people to hear it.
If you can watch that and think that a bunch of politicians have the right to tell this woman what her medical decision should be, I'm sorry, but you can fuck all the way off. And look, it's worth noting that back in 2009, 14 years ago, Republicans fearmongered that the ACA would ultimately lead to death panels making your medical decisions, which I'm sure many of you remember. And of course, that was never true, but it's telling that a panel of judges making your medical decisions for you was the most extreme example Republicans could conjure up to undermine Obamacare. Even in their most distorted version of what the ACA could be, a panel of politicians was the scariest option they could imagine. Which leads us to tonight, where the Republican-led Texas Supreme Court was empaneled to decide whether or not a woman carrying a non-viable pregnancy would have to carry it to term, even as it threatened her life and her future fertility. 14 years after warning that the ACA would usher in death panels, Republicans have manifested that into a reality, because every accusation is a confession. So while I'm heartened to know that Ms. Cox is going to get the care that she needs, just know that for every one of her, there are tens or hundreds of thousands of other women who aren't getting the care they need. And while these stories are deeply personal, and while frankly it feels weird to discuss someone's medical situation on a channel that covers national news, I need everyone to understand that this is the direct result of Republican policy. This is the natural conclusion of empowering a political party whose goal, whose platform is to strip women of their reproductive rights. This is not an accident, it's not a bug, it's not a fluke, this is the point. And I hope people are paying attention. I hope people are seeing what's happening right now, because so far, Republicans have lost races in Kansas and Ohio and Kentucky and Virginia, all predicated on the issue of abortion. Americans have drawn a line in the sand, and it is on this issue, on the issue of politicians inserting themselves between a woman and her doctor. And that was before a panel of mostly old male judges made national news telling a woman carrying a non-viable fetus in Texas that she'll need to carry the pregnancy to term only to bury the baby. If you think think that that won't have an impact, then you haven't been paying attention. And this is a point that I've made before, and I'll make it again. If this is what Republicans are willing to do in the lead up to an election, just imagine what they'll do after, when they're not accountable to any voters. This is not about representing their constituents. This is about imposing their religious will onto a population that doesn't want it. This is about dominance, it's about control, this is about power. And it's happening in states across the country where Republicans are currently in charge. I don't know how much clearer I can make this. If Republicans are in power, this will happen again, and it will happen to a worse extent. If Donald Trump is in power, he will embolden Republicans to disregard the will of the voters and to enact even more extreme measures. This won't be the end, it'll be the beginning. So I'll leave you with this, from my most recent episode of Democracy Watch with the nation's premier voting rights attorney Mark Elias, where he offers a message to anyone who may not understand the implications of not turning out for Joe Biden and the Democrats in 2024.
Okay, so I just got to speak directly to your audience, because I imagine your audience is a lot of good Democrats, but also people who have very high standards for their elected officials. And let me just tell you something. If you think voting for Jill Stein is doing anything other than electing Donald Trump, you are wrong. If you vote for Jill Stein, you're voting for Donald Trump. If you vote for Bobby Kennedy, you are voting for Donald Trump. If you vote for the no labels candidate, whoever he or she is, I don't even care. I don't even want to know. Don't spare me. Spare me it's going to be a Democrat or a Republican or Joe Manchin or this person. If you vote for the no labels candidate, you are voting for Donald Trump. And I'll tell you one more thing. If you sit at home because you're disappointed, or you sit at home because you think your vote doesn't matter, or you sit at home for whatever reason and you don't vote, you're helping elect Donald Trump. So, I'm tired of the people who are saying I'm going to have a protest, or I'm going to sit out, or, we're disappointed because the Supreme Court, struck down the student loan. Joe Biden fought for student loan relief. Joe Biden has fought for more things than he's given credit for. But even if those were aside, if you don't participate in this election and enthusiastically drag your friends, your neighbors, your family, drag them to the polls, make sure they're registered, drag them to the polls and make sure they vote, then you are feeding into what Donald Trump wants for this country, which is a dictatorship.
Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to the channel and do your part to help grow the progressive media ecosystem. I don't do sponsorships or paid ads, I won't ask for money, but just subscribing to this channel goes a really long way, and it helps get the message out to more people. The subscribe button is right here on the screen. You can also subscribe to my Spanish language channel, which I made to reach those crucial Spanish-speaking voters. That link is on the screen too. And finally, if you want to listen to my audio podcast, you can follow that link as well. Thanks so much for watching.